Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, kushalmehra. I apologize for the slight delay in our start. We were having some tech issues, but we're kind of going to work around them in the live stream today. We're having some echo issues, so I apologize for that in the beginning, but I will try to work around them. So today's discussion is on the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict. As you know, there has been a lot of back and forth. When it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I was waiting to do a podcast on the same, and I wanted to have a holistic view of what the exact current conflict is all about. And I was like, who better to go to and talk about it than Jaideep. So Jaideep, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Kushal. It's always fun to talk about this topic.
Okay, Jaideep. So now let us start like this. So I'll request you to first give everybody who's going to be watching this right now. See, a lot of times people think these kinds of questions are in a way silly or basic or immaterial, but I actually think there's a lot of value in them. So if you could you explain the current conflict, because there is so much confusion even about, or disinformation even about, what the current conflict is. What is it all about? So let's start there. What the current conflict that is basically leading, rockets flying in from the Gaza Strip and the Iron Dome being activated, and then retaliation from the Israeli side. So what is it all about?
See, many people want to pin everything down, pin everything to this, what's happened in Sheikh Jarrah, or Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood, as it's known in Hebrew. And that's not really the cause, in my opinion. I mean, we'll get into it. I'll still tell you guys what that is. But I think this is the age-old conflict that's coming up. I think it's just an excuse for the firing. That said, now what has happened? Let's go through this. Now, it's not the Shimon HaTzadik thing. It's earlier, about a month ago, for security reasons, the Israeli police put some fences near Damascus Gate. And the Palestinians protested. Now, 2 years ago, when they put metal detectors there, the Palestinians had also protested. So anything the Israelis do for security, law and order measures is always protested, simply because it's Israel doing it. Simple as that. So anyway, now that's one. There was some protests. A few rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel, and Israel struck back. But because it's not thousands of rockets like this time, I don't think the international press picked up on it, because this is a day-to-day occurrence in Israel. Unfortunately, rockets being fired from Gaza or from Lebanon, something like that. And after that, what happened was, a few days later, Mahmoud Abbas decided to cancel Palestinian elections. He blamed it conveniently on the Israelis, saying, but Israel is not allowing East Jerusalemites to vote in the elections. And now the theory is here that a lot of people think that it would have been a close election, and Abbas would have probably won those elections. Now, those elections have not happened for quite a long time here. Now, roughly 15 years or something, elections have not happened, right? And the last time the elections were held in Gaza, Hamas won with a slight majority. I think out of 130, 35 seats, they have 70, 75, just over the half thing. And Hamas, in a way, I think, wanted to remind the Palestinians that they are still there, and they are the defenders of Jerusalem or something. I think that's one of the motivations Hamas has. Now, we get to what I think you are referring to, what has happened in Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood. In 1875, a Jewish man bought that area because it is holy for whatever reason to the Jewish people. And what happened is, there were Jews and Arabs living there. It was a mixed neighborhood. In 1948, when the state of Israel was established, as we know, it was invaded by 6 other Arab states. And what happened was that of Jerusalem was captured by the Jordanians. And the Jordanians basically ethnically cleansed. I don't necessarily mean kill, but basically pushed out the Jews from the neighborhood completely. And Arabs started living there. In 1967, they took that area back. And since then, there has been a dispute over who owns that land, because the Jews have bought it in 1875. I remind you, not in 1948 during the war or something. 1875. So the Supreme Court, these people have been living there for so long. Let's not disturb this. Um, so let them live there, but the Jews will maintain the ownership of the land, and the people living there should pay rent. But now for 40 years or more, no rent has been paid. So recently, what has happened? A court decision said that the but essentially the Supreme Court finally ruled that the Arabs who have not paid not for more than 40 years can be evicted. Now, this was just an excuse again for Hamas to start shooting rockets into Israel. I don't think this issue is itself so sensitive. Now, that said, that any land ownership in Jerusalem is very sensitive to all religions, and you will notice that a lot of, although there's no law exactly, you will notice that Christians will not sell to non-Christians, Christians will not sell to non-Muslims, non-Muslims will not sell to non-Jews, simply because it is such important holy real estate. So moving these Arabs will create problems for them, problems from the Muslim perspective.
So here's my question here. Then, so this is the crux of the issue. So the first question, when it comes to the international media and the way it has been projected, is so I hear two versions, right? There is the Israeli version, and the Israeli version is that this is a property dispute, and in fact, that is something that I wrote in the description of the podcast too. That the Israeli version is that this is a property dispute, and I think it was like four apartments or whatever properties, or just six families or people who have been told to vacate the premises because they have not been paying rent, and it's nothing more than that. And the other side, the accusation towards the Israelis has been that no, Israel is a dominating state using excessive power. We'll get into the apartheid state a little bit later on, but so the accusation against Israel is that no, this is not a property dispute. This is a historical dispute where Israel is oppressing, innocent Palestinian people. So, what would be the answer for that, Jaideep?
See, the state of affairs is that, I mean, yes, that Israel is trying to remove those specific families only. But if you're going to, start judging Israel on things it might do, this is ridiculous. You cannot convict someone for things that they may do. You have to see what Israel has done, and this is something people don't know, that Israel does have many laws regarding what do you call acquisition of land. Like, for example, Israel cannot acquire land that is privately owned. Now, if it had belonged to, like, whatever you want to call it, the Arab Executive Council or something. I don't think such land exists anymore, because that is a long time back. I'm talking about the 1920s and 1930s. But if something like that, some public land had been there, Israel can take it. Private land cannot be taken by Israel. Laws have developed. It's not like from 1948 onwards. It's always been this way. But it is not so simple as people think it is for Israel to just come in and take the land. And the Supreme Court has been fairly activist in this. They have actually, and that is one of the reasons why you will see many people on Israel's right criticizing the quote unquote legal revolution of Aharon Barak in the late 90s, in the mid 90s.
So then I have another follow-up question. If that is the case, then explain this to me. How come there is such a huge variation of opinions when it comes from one side to the other? So I'll give you an example. The entire reportage in a certain section of whether it's Western media or the Indian media, it's as if the Israelis are gonna eat these people up. They're not really letting these people survive. Then how is the narrative so lopsided in that case?
It's because, see, I mean, this sheer numbers game. I mean, how many news organizations, how many countries support Israel? And this has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with their own selfish motives for whatever reason, oil or domestic Muslim populations or whatever it is. And this is sheer numbers, and that's why we hear that a lot. That's all I can think of. It makes no sense otherwise, because if you come here and see what's going on, it's fairly clear. Now, of course, what happens is, if your ideology is Palestine from the river to the sea, then this is obviously a problem for you. That even this much land you're losing, or something to that level. But if you're looking at Israel as an accepted fact, and you have to deal with this entity, then this is really a small legal real estate issue of paying rent or not. Now, the smallest of issues like the metal detectors, like I mentioned a little while ago, a couple of years ago, became a big hue and cry, and people were protesting and all that sort of stuff. Um, Riots have happened in the past also, and now again this is here. This event has also resulted in riots happening between Arabs and Jews in some cities in Israel, mixed cities in Israel. The point is, but here I will say one very clear thing: if it had not been for this issue, it would have been something else for sure. Let us not put too much emphasis on this events of Shimon HaSadiq neighborhood, because I think Hamas was itching for a fight to prove their relevance to the Palestinian political process. And after this, last 10 days, I think their chances in the elections, if they are ever held, of course, have increased substantially.
All right, so this is interesting. So then, what do you say? So I'll give you an example of the international coverage right now. So what has happened is, as always, most of the members of the international media, whether it's CNN or whether it's the late night stand-up comics, who I don't take seriously, but unfortunately or fortunately, whether we want to admit it or not, a lot of people do take them seriously. So there is this constant accusation on Israel from some senators in the United States of America and England, noticeably always on the left and the far left. They seem to be saying that Israel is an apartheid state, and they are, trying to bully the Palestinians. And the way they are bullying them is like, okay, yeah, the Palestinians are throwing rockets, but they reply disproportionately to those rockets by doing this or that. I mean, what do you make of this whole trope being said that, so what, the Palestinians threw rockets at them, the reply from the Israeli side is disproportionate? I mean, is there any kind of a historical precedent said that, if you punch me, I can only give you a slap?
See, this whole notion of proportionality is the most asinine thing I've ever heard of. Um, like if you look at, say, I mean, look at World War II or like Vietnam War. There's several examples I can give you in history. I'm not sure like anybody follows proportionality. The idea of military engagement is to have 3-1 superiority, 5-1 superiority in force, because you want to win a war with the least casualties to yourself. This is not a chess game or something where everybody takes turns and politely shakes hands or something. Lives are at stake, and so the idea is not to be proportional. The idea is to wipe out the enemy with minimum loss to yourself. That's one thing. Secondly, when people say that more people have died in Gaza than in Israel, basically what they're saying is we want more Israelis to die, then it'll be okay. Never mind the fact that the Hamas rockets are low technology compared to the Israeli weapons, even though they are getting better, the Hamas rockets. And never mind that they can't aim properly. And never mind that Israel has a very good defense system, mind you, not an offensive system, into missile defense system, which stops many of these rockets from hitting with 90% accuracy or so. The notion that a battle is fair only if like both sides have equal casualties is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I don't think any army in the world will accept this. And what happens is in when you, the tragedy of urban warfare is exactly that a lot of civilians will die because they have deliberately hidden themselves in hospitals, in mosques, in schools, in media buildings, because they know of the PR. Because nowadays, remember, we have a PR war now. This is not back in the day where two armies meet on the field, nobody knows what's going on until a messenger comes in the evening saying this army has prevailed. There's a constant media battle, and that's exactly why they do it. It is inevitable when you're fighting in a city that there won't be collateral damage. Now, if you look at the map of Gaza, for example, look where the settlements are. All the border areas have been relatively vacated, and they've all shifted into the sort of center. Hamas can very easily find areas where nobody is there, have their own base there, but they will never do that. Of course not. They want it in the basement of the hospital, because if Israel strikes the hospital, there'll be a PR outcry. The roof knocking, for example, the Israel calls people in advance. I mean, I don't know who does that. And then their excuse is what? Oh, but that one time they didn't call. It's not an obligation of the Israeli military to call every single time. The fact that they call anybody at all shows how much they are taking care of civilian lives. There are several instances in intelligence in like even you will see the footage released by the planes when they're bombing areas. Because there are children or women or civilians, if they say there's so many civilians, they'll call off the mission, and some terrorists will go free that night. Gets lucky. So, and I have seen like Australian, American, British servicemen, colonels, and officers, military officers, say to me point blank, like a person, as well as I'm sure you can find these clips on YouTube also, where they say that Israel has done far more than any other army in terms of reducing civilian casualties.
So again, I've heard this, that when Israel actually tries to bomb the Palestinian side, like even Abhijit was talking about it in another podcast that we were having, that he says they first warn the people in that area, then they drop um, a very low intensity bomb that lets them know, look, we're going to be, doing some damage over here, and then they go about doing that. But in spite of all of that, this is more like, I mean, I can't blame the Israelis for this, but in spite of all of that, the narratives always seems to be that Israel is butchering everybody over there. Nobody can survive. There are dead bodies everywhere. It's like, I don't know. In fact, this is the, I don't know what's your opinion on this. In fact, I want to have a discussion on this too. How do you deal with such kind of a narrative, Jaideep, where no matter what you do, the other side refuses to listen to you, and in such a scenario, how does one go out deciphering the truth? Because look, personally, I don't believe Israel can't be wrong on even one issue. I mean, I don't know. There must be something that Israel does wrong. But when the other side indulges in such lies, then how do you think we actually try and find out maybe where the Israelis also have messed up?
I think one thing is, yes, given how polarized everything has become in the last few years, in the last 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, it's much more difficult to find out exactly what has happened. That is unfortunate. It puts a lot more pressure on the individual to go through a lot of news media and everything. Um, and there's unfortunately very little you can do about this, and you have to educate yourself. You can't do a 10-second Google search and expect to have an opinion, and that's where the problem starts. That's exactly what people want. So one way is to vet the quality of sources, meaning not people you agree with necessarily, but people you can trust will share both sides. Now, I have no problem saying that both sides have done bad things. I don't think that's a shock, because there's a war going on. In the heat of battle, things happen. There are cases where, for example, Israeli security services have been more than perhaps necessary. Now, of course, there are many reasons for this also, but that reason doesn't excuse them. Like, for example, Palestinians dying in Israeli custody, for example, or when someone is taken prisoner, he is restrained with overwhelming force that he, breaks his hip or something in the process. Now, these things have happened, but Israel being a democracy can't hide this. I remember in the mid 80s, there was one case, I think, where the Shin Bet, one of the security services in Israel, they were captured on camera or something, or I think somebody saw them. In those days, they didn't have too many cameras. Beating some captured Arab. I'm not sure if they not came from West Bank or is an Arab Israeli, but whatever. It's become a huge UN cry. Israel does not have a scheme whereby killing Arabs gives you stipends. This is the Palestinian Authority that does it, and there's a fundamental difference. The question is, look, mistakes will happen, and these are real tragedies when these mistakes happen, because there are people involved. It's not a little check mark. Family involved. There's a little girl involved. There's like a mother, a brother. So in that sense, it is tragic. But what is the intention is something I to ask you. If you look overwhelmingly, the people who are anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, so to speak, you hear the same rhetoric. I want to wipe the Jews out. I want to wipe Israel out. Like, that's basically it. Look at the Hamas charter. For all that we will accept is, we are willing to accept Israel rhetoric, the charter has not been modified yet. The charter clearly says that we will never recognize Israel. So, what are you supposed to do in the face of such hostility? You don't have a choice. As Golda Meir said once, if the Arabs put down their weapons, we will have peace. If we put down our weapons, we will not be there.
So, in such a scenario, what do you think are the possible steps, not just for, let's say, as far as this conflict is concerned, where do you see this conflict going then? I mean, if both sides are just, hell bent on their point of view, then how do we work around this? Because one side says, you're not even allowed to attack me while I bomb the living, even though from low intensity or whatever intensity rockets there are. And then the other side says, look, we're going to defend ourselves. And then this property dispute, which is which was pretty much, it went to the courts, and the court said that there is no proper documentation on the Israeli side, the Israeli courts, I mean. So how do you solve such a mess? I mean, do you see a solution, or this is just going to be a back and forth going on forever?
I think one of the reasons this goes back and forth is because the international community allows this. We pretend that we are taking care of humanitarian concerned about Gazans or something, but we are not. We are enabling a terrorist organization to be in power, ruin the lives of Gazans. You want to free Gaza? Yeah, you should free Gaza, not from Israel, but from Hamas. The fact of the matter is, Gaza, Israel got out in 2005. So if Gaza is poor today, it's because these guys are spending money buying rockets and anti-tank guided missiles and these sorts of things. That they're paying stipends to all these terrorists and not investing it in hospitals and roads and clean water and these sorts of things. And the same thing I can say in West Bank also, although it's much better in the West Bank than Gaza, of course. There's Area C, which is under Israeli control, Area A, which is under Palestinian control, where they are in charge. So anybody who's complaining there, it's like really their fault. And Area B is mixed, meaning the civilian aspects are Palestinian and the security aspects are shared. Now, the A and B zones, Israelis are not allowed to go, but Palestinians can freely come to the Israeli zone. So you talk about freedom of movement. I'm just going to explain to you. People come from Gaza into Israel all the time, but Israelis don't go into Gaza because it's just too unsafe, and so the Israelis are not allowed to go to Gaza. So this notion that Israel is an apartheid state or something, yeah. See, here's the problem: apartheid also, there's an intent of keeping it that way. The thing with the South African apartheid regime was they said this is a permanent truth and this is how we want to keep it. If you look at the Israelis, for example, Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert, they made some real peace efforts, but they were spurned. What to do? One of the other things you'll notice is when a struggle goes on for so long, at the end of the day, somebody is going to get tired of it and say, well, if you don't want to listen to me, fine, I'll just keep bombing you. And that's just how it is going to be. We'll see. We can make more bullets than you can make babies. Let's go for it. The big shift in Israel, in my opinion, comes with the second Intifada. If you remember, I don't know if you remember, but in the late 90s, there was a lot of left-wing sort of support for the peace process, Oslo, and all that sort of stuff. Second Intifada starts in 2000, and that's the beginning of the right-wing turn. And people are tired of fighting non-stop without any solution. And because what they say is, look, we have seen all these peace negotiations happen, and every single time it is sabotaged by the Palestinians. I understand the Palestinian perspective here. What they are saying is we don't want to institutionalize our dispossession. But if you're it's basically like they went to a casino, they gambled 100 rupees, they lost, and then they're like, no, I want my 100 rupees back. It doesn't work that way. Sorry. Now your negotiations, see what you can get back, and you have to work with it.
All right, then what do you tell those people who say, oh, it's only because of the settlements that this thing keeps on existing? If the Israelis would not have done those settlements, these problems would not have existed. The only thing Israel needs to do is get rid of those settlements, and then we can sit on the table and talk, and we can have those two-nation solution, etc., etc.
My first question is, tell me, the settlement started after 1967. Are you trying to tell me that there was peace before 1967? It's my first response to that. The answer is no. So don't even bother telling me yes. So this is absolutely not true that the settlements are the cause. And what has happened is also with the settlements, what happens is, in many cases, what Israel does is land swap. Instead of moving 600,000 people back and forth around the country, they say, okay, look, we can remove this settlement over here. These settlements, there's too many people remove them. But what we'll do is, okay, they take, like, I don't know, say 310 square kilometers, so we'll give you 310 square kilometers somewhere else. If you look at the Trump plan, for example, if you look at the borders, there was land swap agreement. I think the sticking point is not the settlement. Actually, if I remember correctly, the negotiations, they all break down over Jerusalem at the end of the day. And the issue with that is very simple, as the Israelis have pointed out time and again. When Jordan is a moderate Arab power, mind you, again, okay, when Jordan held Jerusalem before 1967, the Israelis could not access the Temple Mount. Today, Israel owns Jerusalem completely, and guess what? They have been nice enough to allow the Waqf from Jordan to continue administering the Temple Mount. I any country that wins a war so decisive, like in 1967, and then says, okay, fine, let's not unnecessarily piss people off. We have fun, but it's okay. We can, allow these people to come also. Israel could have said, no, the same way you guys kept us out, we'll keep you out.
Okay, then if this is the case, and this is, as you're saying, a religious conflict, and at least in my view, when it comes to religion, there never seems to be a good solution, because religion, especially of a certain variety, always seems to be a very absolutist state of mind. I mean, religion tends to create, when at its not at its mild form, but religion, when it's used at its extreme form, does tend to create an absolutist mindset. um, what do you do then? So if it is the Temple Mount, it is obviously of value to both the religious sects, and as we all know, that the Muslims have control and the Jews are not even allowed to enter there. So then, are we to conclude that this is a never ending problem and we're always going to be bearing this, and let's just come to terms with the reality that this is going to go on forever?
I don't know if it'll go on forever. I'm hoping that someday, maybe 300 years from now, or something, somebody's going to be like, okay, this has gone on for too long. I don't even remember why we are fighting. What the hell is going on? Everybody likes to give the example of how Germany and France managed to make peace. And I always point out, yes, that's true, but that's after about 1200 years of warfare. I hope to God it doesn't take 1200 years in this situation. But I think at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of willingness on both sides to talk. If I were an Israeli nationalist, let's say a hardcore nationalist, right, secular nationalist, I would want a two-state solution for the simple reason because I want to maintain the Jewish identity of my state. If I annex all this, either I have to consign myself to not being democratic and being an apartheid state, because I'm going to absorb like 3 to 4 million Palestinians and not give them rights. But if I give them rights, then the Jewish nature is going to vanish, evaporate overnight. So, if I were an Israeli nationalist, I would want a two-state solution. I can't imagine when people say Israelis don't want. I don't think that's true. Maybe the religious people, but that's about 10% of the population, honestly speaking, who are absolutely hardcore on not giving up the West Bank at all. Um, and the thing is, I don't think it's necessarily purely a religious conflict, because see, back in the day, it was a nationalist conflict. Uh, with the weakness, with the destruction of like heavy damage, the PLO and all these things, the previous Palestinian attempts, Hamas comes to the fore only in the early 80s, basically. And Hamas is an Islamic movement. Before that, it was a nationalist. So one hope is that Islamists will be defeated and the nationalists will. This is intra Palestinian questions only. I'm saying. When we talk about Palestine, let's not pretend for even half a second that there's one united Palestinian front. There are many factions. So let's be very clear. They have the Islamic Hamas. They have the Palestinian Authority, and sometimes they agree, and usually they don't with each other. But anyway, the thing is if we can see the rise of a nationalist rather than Islamist grouping again, um, maybe there's some chance of a dialogue or something.
Okay, then if somebody was to ask that, you know, eventually, if we're going to be drawing, so if there is a two-state solution, again, the settlements need to be dealt with, the issue of the Temple Mount needs to be dealt with, then what do you think they're going to go back to a scenario where they were very close to the two-state solution, where they had some, I mean, where does this seems to be one of those issues which is going to be like, इसका कोई solution ही नहीं दिखता है कि both the sides seem to be hardening their stance, or do you think the American interference would help, or I mean, in these cases nowadays, America also politically has taken a very hard U-turn. I mean, normally America used to be, very much into the side of Israel, and now there is a serious, political wing coming up in America where you see a lot of anti-Semitism too. So, do you think that is also a cause for worry, because otherwise America would have played a serious role in, settling this problem?
Um, Anti-Semitism is a problem wherever it is, yes, and certainly in America it is rising, but it is not of too much concern just yet for the state of Israel. I think they're definitely keeping an eye on it, and it is a concern, in the sense that it exists. But in terms of influence on policy, not so much. Yes, I mean, now we have the squad, for example, so it's definitely, it is increasing, but I don't think that's an issue. Here's the thing. I don't think settlements are a problem. I think we can the settlements. I think you can land for settlements. I keep, Israel keeps certain settlements and gives land somewhere else in exchange. That can be done. That's not going to be the problem. It's the point is, are you willing to even discuss this? As I mean, the Israelis have been saying for a long time now, almost 20 years, I think, that they have no partners for peace. I have to agree with that. Who can you negotiate with? If you negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, guess what? The rockets are not being fired by the Palestinian Authority right now. It's Hamas, and Hamas is quite clear. We want to wipe Israel out. You have an intractable foe who's not going to change his mind, and is basically kept alive by international, I don't know, bleeding hearts or whatever you want to call it. It's not bleeding hearts. It's just that, see, when they are not suffering, nobody cares. If bombs start blowing up in London's metros and Madrid's metros, suddenly these people will immediately realize what the problem is with the UNRWA and all these other organizations and stuff. So many NGOs are being used by the Palestinians to fund money for these sorts of efforts. This you have, and that's why this problem is being kept alive in many ways. If they genuinely, like, if there was a genuine effort in Europe and America to curb these things, I think you can really get a stranglehold on this. No, see, here's the thing. Everybody, there's this false belief that the insurgencies will always outlast the occupier. This sort of romantic conversation, talk. The fact of the matter is, for an insurgency, it has to be funded from somewhere. It has to get weapons and all these sorts of things. It is not only Iran that is providing Hamas and Hezbollah with weapons. They're getting it from so many Islamic charities in Kuwait and Qatar and all these sorts of other places. Turkey is supporting them also. And there are many, like, well-meaning people, what do you call, organizations who have been misled, and then there are some deliberately duplicitous organizations which are siphoning money on this. If this can be controlled, even if you just what do you call, turn off the faucets from Europe and America, that would be a huge blow in that sense. This the root of this problem, ultimately follow the money. I would say that would really do some damage.
All right, so let me just see if somebody, so I'll just take one or two questions from live viewers. So somebody has asked, is this a power struggle between Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas?
Um, yes, um, because I mean, remember in 2007 and 8, Fatah and Hamas went to war. So there is that aspect too. That's exactly what I was saying earlier. That I think that I don't think, many people say Hamas planned this. I don't think they planned this, honestly. They fired a few rockets. They thought they'll, maybe Israel will fire one or two rockets or something, and it'll be over. And if you notice, Hamas, within like a day or maybe two at most, they were like, okay, ceasefire, ceasefire. They were open to it because they didn't expect it to go that much. Now, what's happened is Israel really has gone after them, done some real damage. A lot more needs to be done, of course, but to really, like, weaken them. But still, some serious damage has been done. Um, and that's what changed the tone of this conflict, and people have forgotten the political side between Hamas and Mahmoud Abbas. That is definitely an element. I think that is the real reason why this started, not Shimon Hatzadik.
All right, so somebody has asked, can this be fixed by giving the evictees alternate property somewhere else, just like maybe the Babri case?
In principle, I suppose that can be done, although that is there's a, it's not a, I don't know if it's a fair solution necessarily, but it is a solution that causes less bloodshed. The reason I say that is because they have no claim to property elsewhere. But nonetheless, if it is done, I think yes, that might help a little bit. But honestly speaking, I think the fact that this land is in Jerusalem changes the nature of this. Because like even if those families are willing, I guarantee you there are other people who are not willing. In fact, there have been cases in the past. I think in 2016, I think it was an Arab man who sold his house to a Jew in Jerusalem was killed. And no, these are the things. See, the international media is nowhere to be seen when these sorts of things happen. People should, if you really want to get to the bottom of this, I'd say learn Hebrew, start reading the local press, learn Arabic also. Fine, I mean, read the local press, and you'll see a completely different picture.
So, Jaideep, what would you tell to those people who say, "Are how can those people have been living there forever? That is their claim to the land. How can you tell them to go, etc., etc.? It is their land too. They also have stake in that land." So, if somebody raised that kind of a question,
See, the way I look at it is that Palestine is about as real as South Asia. Does South Asia exist? Of course it does. Can you show me the passport, the flag of South Asia? No. Why not? Because it's a region. Palestine was never a state. So when you say it was their land, yeah, they were living there, sure, but there was no political authority. Who owned the land before the Israelis came there? The British. And before that, the Ottomans. And you keep going back. You'll go to the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Greeks, and then you'll go back again to the Jews. So this notion that they've always been there, yeah, people have been there. That is true. But my point is not whether this person has been there. My point is the national identity, the claim to national identity, and I think Israel will have the same issue. I don't think is see Israel has 20% what do you call it, non-Jews, Arab Israeli population, right? The issue is, and these people they're not. It's not compulsory for them to serve in the military and all these sort of things. But if many people do join the military from the Arab Israeli community, not a lot, but still quite a few do. Enough that I can mention it. It's not like one or two people. It's enough. Now the issue is this. Now, let me give you an example of France, for example, the great secular republic, right? What did they say when Napoleon freed the Jews? They said the individual Jew, all the rights. To the Jewish national community, no rights, no recognition. That's exactly what Israel would say. You want to live here, that's fine, but forget this idea that you are a separate state. You are not a state. You are an individual. You happen to be an Arab, to be an Jew. Fine, you can live here. You can, and the thing is, for all the so-called apartheid state and all this nonsense that I hear, do you know that the Israeli state has allowed its Arab population to have its own education stream? It's not like one uniform education board for all Israelis. The Arabs have their own newspapers and radios and schools, which get funding from the Israeli government. Now, if this is apartheid, I think I need to go look at a dictionary again. I'll be pretty confused by this sort of apartheid definition.
Okay, so Jaideep, before we wrap things up, so just what would your last comments be? What do you do with this scenario? Like, do you see the conflict dying down in in the next few days? You think Hamas is going to reduce the intensity of the rocket firing, or do you see the Israeli military actually increasing the intensity of attacks on the other side? And also, in your closing comments, can you also tell us a bit about Fatah? What happened to them?
Fatah's in the West Bank, and I'm sure they're happy with what's going on right now because like they're happy for any sort of damage to the Israelis and that sort of stuff. But they're not going to get involved in it. And Fatah is essentially the internationally recognized face of Palestine. So there are many things that they cannot do. If they openly engage in the sort of activities Hamas does, they'll be branded terrorist and they will lose whatever diplomatic gains they have made in the last 20, 30 years. So that's one thing. There are some things that have really puzzled me about the Israeli approach to this. For example, they announced that they've been trying to kill these two people, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Daif. I was like, why would anyone announce? So this has really puzzled me also. Why they have been so, open about these things? I don't get it. That said, I think this will die down for the simple reason that Hamas can't keep going on forever. There are only so many rockets they can fire, and Israel is going to give it back hard. I mean, I live near an Air Force base, and I'll tell you that many times in the middle of the night, I can't sleep because there's so many jets flying over. In the morning, I wake up and I'll hear 160 planes took part in an operation that pounded the tunnels which Hamas has dug underground to sneak its operatives into Israel. And they have targeted rocket launchers and these sorts of things. So, in that sense, Israel can definitely last longer than Hamas in that sense. But what Israel can't last is the public pressure, international pressure. Um, and in that sense, I think the conflict can die down. In fact, there's talks of ceasefire starting tomorrow 6 p.m. I don't think it will happen by tomorrow 6 p.m., but already these discussions have happened. Um, and so, and basically what's happening is what the Israelis call mowing the grass. The problem is that the grass grows back stronger. In 2005, the disengagement when the Israelis left Gaza unilaterally without demanding anything from the Palestinians. Palestinian rockets could barely penetrate like 15, 20 kilometers into Israel. Now they're hitting Beersheba and Tel Aviv, and the range of the rockets has improved. This is the problem. But yeah.
All right, so I guess Jaideep, we'll wrap it up now. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I know we have had technical issues today, but we somehow made through them whatever we could do about it. So, Jaideep, thanks a lot for coming and talking to us at the Cārvāka podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if your listeners have questions, I think you can put my Twitter handle on. I'm usually pretty open to sensible discussions.
All right, guys, time to wrap today's discussion up. Actually, if you go to the description of the podcast, you'll already see Jaideep's Twitter handle mentioned over there. So if you have any questions for Jaideep, please feel free to reach out to Jaideep on this issue. He it's actually he's spent a major portion of his life studying this issue in detail, and he knows what he's talking about. Um, I once again apologize for all the technical issues today. I will, once I go off the live stream, I'll edit all of the kinks out, and if you maybe watch this a couple of days down the line, you'll not even know that anything happened. Maybe the audio issues will remain, but yeah, I'll try to fix them in the audio version too. Once again, thanks a lot for supporting the Cārvāka podcast. I request you to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, leave your comments there. If you can support the Cārvāka podcast, please become a member of the YouTube channel. Also go on Patreon and subscribe to the channel. If you want to send direct donations, you can send them to kushalmehra at icici, and also buy the Cārvāka podcast merch on kushalmehra.com or kadakmerch.com. I'll see you next time. Until then, namaste, take care, goodbye.